64 passengers watched in uncomfortable silence as flight attendant Jenny rolled her eyes, loudly snapping her gum while pointing a manicured finger at the quiet man in seat 14C. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't caused a scene. He had simply asked for a cup of water after sitting on the tarmac for 3 hours without air conditioning. But on Flight 812 to Boston, patience had worn thin, and the crew had decided that the man in the faded gray hoodie was the perfect target for their frustration. They thought he was a nobody. They thought he was just another nuisance in economy. They were wrong. Dead wrong. And in exactly 20 minutes, when the captain's voice would tremble over the intercom announcing a name that would freeze the blood in Jenny's veins, they would realize that the man they were mocking was the only person who could save the life of the one person they feared most. The heat inside the cabin of Meridian Airways Flight 812 was becoming a physical weight, pressing down on the chests of everyone on board. It was mid-July at Chicago O'Hare, and a minor technical glitch as the pilot, Captain Richard Miller, had breezily called it 2 hours ago, had turned the Boeing 737 into a pressurized sauna. The auxiliary power unit was failing, which meant the air conditioning was wheezing out nothing but lukewarm breath, and the mood in the cabin was curdling from annoyance into open hostility. In seat 14C, Dr. Raymond Hayes adjusted his glasses and tried to focus on the medical journal resting on his tray table. He was a man who lived his life in high-pressure environments, usually with a scalpel in his hand and a life on the line, so a hot airplane cabin was manageable. He was 45, with salt and pepper stubble and a calm, stoic demeanor that had served him well in emergency rooms from Baltimore to Berlin. Today, however, he wasn't wearing his white coat or his tailored suits. He was in a comfortable, nondescript gray hoodie and sweatpants, exhausted after a 40-hour shift and a red-eye flight from a conference in Seattle. He just wanted to get home to Boston, kiss his wife, and sleep for a week. He licked his dry lips. His throat felt like sandpaper. He checked his watch. 3 hours and 15 minutes since they pushed back from the gate. "Excuse me," Raymond said softly as the flight attendant passed by. Jenny, the senior flight attendant for the economy cabin, didn't stop. She was a tall woman with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was currently marching down the aisle collecting trash with an aggressive efficiency, ignoring the sea of raised hands. "Ma'am?" Raymond tried again, slightly louder this time. Jenny stopped, but she didn't turn her body. She just swiveled her head, her expression tight. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is still on. You need to remain seated." "I am seated," Raymond said, his voice level. "I was just wondering if we could get some water. It's been 3 hours, and it's very hot in here. People are starting to feel faint." "We are waiting for ground crew to bring a water truck," Jenny snapped, her voice carrying over the low hum of the engines. "I cannot conjure water out of thin air, sir. Unless you have a magical hose in that backpack of yours, you'll have to wait like everyone else." A few passengers nearby tittered nervously. It was that distinct sound of people who were afraid to offend the authority figure, hoping that by laughing along, they wouldn't be the next target. Raymond frowned. "I understand the logistics, but there are elderly passengers on board. If you have any reserves in the galley—" "I said sit back," Jenny interrupted, stepping closer, invading his personal space. "You are being disruptive. Do not make me call the captain." Raymond looked at her, really looked at her, analyzing her dilated pupils and the sheen of sweat on her forehead. She was stressed, likely overworked, but that didn't excuse the venom. "I'm not trying to be disruptive," he said calmly. "I'm concerned about dehydration. Especially for the woman in 15A. He gestured slightly to the elderly woman behind him, who was fanning herself with a safety card, looking pale. Jenny scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard it seemed theatrical. "Oh, so you're a doctor now? You know, everyone in economy thinks they're an expert the moment we hit a delay. Just put your headphones back on and let me do my job." She turned on her heel and stormed toward the front galley, leaving Raymond stunned. The man next to him, a younger guy in a business suit named Greg, leaned over. "Don't worry about her, man," Greg whispered. "She's been biting heads off since we boarded. Just keep your head down." Raymond sighed, rubbing his temples. He could have pulled out his credentials. He could have told her that he was the chief of thoracic surgery at Massachusetts General Hospital. He could have mentioned that he was on the board of directors for a medical charity that Meridian Airways publicly sponsored. But Raymond Hayes was not a man who used his title as a bludgeon. He believed in decency. Unfortunately, decency was in short supply on Flight 812. 10 minutes later, the curtain separating first class from economy whipped open. Jenny returned, but she wasn't alone. Captain Richard Miller had emerged from the cockpit, likely to stretch his legs and grab a coffee from the functioning first-class galley. He was a man in his late 50s, with a silver mustache and the confident swagger of a pilot who had spent 30 years being told he was God in the sky. He stood in the aisle, leaning against the bulkhead, chatting with Jenny loud enough for the first 10 rows of economy to hear. "Unbelievable," Miller chuckled, taking a sip from a bottle of cold, condensation-covered water. "Ground control says another 40 minutes. Can you believe the union reps?" "Tell me about it," Jenny sighed, leaning in conspiratorially. "And the packs back here are getting rowdy. I've got a guy in 14C who thinks he runs the airline, trying to tell me how to do my job, demanding water like I'm his personal servant." Raymond stiffened. He could hear every word. Miller glanced over Jenny's shoulder, scanning the rows until his eyes landed on Raymond. He took in the hoodie, the messy hair, the dark skin. He smirked, a look of dismissive arrogance that made Raymond's blood finally begin to simmer. 14C? Miller said, his voice booming slightly. "The guy in the hoodie? He looks like he's used to waiting at bus stops, not flying. Probably his first time on a plane." Jenny laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Right? He tried to give me medical advice about the lady behind him. I told him to stick to his coloring books." The humiliation was public now. Miller wasn't even trying to be discreet. He walked a few steps down the economy aisle, stopping right next to Raymond's row. He loomed over him, the gold bars on his epaulets catching the sunlight streaming through the window. "Everything okay back here, folks?" Miller asked the row, but his eyes were locked on Raymond. "We having trouble following crew instructions?" Raymond looked up, meeting the captain's gaze. "No trouble, Captain. Just asked for water. It's 80 degrees in here." "It's 76, Miller corrected smugly, though he hadn't checked a gauge. "And we have a chain of command, son. You listen to the flight attendants. They know the safety protocols. You don't. If you have a problem with authority, you can get off. The door is right there. Of course, then you'd be stuck in Chicago with no refund. Can you afford another ticket?" The implication hung in the air, heavy and ugly. "Can you afford it?" "I can afford it," Raymond said quietly. "Sure you can." Miller winked at Jenny, who was smirking behind him. "Look, just sit tight. Stop harassing my crew. We'll get you to Boston eventually. Try to sleep it off." Miller turned back to the front, patting Jenny on the shoulder. "If he gives you any more lip, let me know. I'll have airport police waiting at the gate. I don't have time for unruly passengers today. I've got a dinner reservation." "Will do, Captain," Jenny beamed, feeling empowered. As they retreated behind the curtain, the cabin buzzed with whispers. Some were sympathetic to Raymond, but many were annoyed. The narrative had been set. Raymond was the troublemaker, delaying things further. "You shouldn't have said anything," the woman in 14 muttered, clutching her purse. "You're going to get us all kicked off." Raymond didn't respond. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, practicing the same centering technique he used before opening a patient's chest cavity. He knew who he was. He knew his worth. He didn't need a pilot or a flight attendant to validate him. But the universe has a funny way of balancing scales, and the tipping point was approaching faster than anyone realized. Up in first class, seated in 2A, was a man named Alistair Sterling. Sterling was a heavy-set man, red-faced and sweating profusely, clutching his chest. He was the executive vice president of operations for Meridian Airways, Captain Miller's boss's boss. He was traveling incognito to check on regional service standards. He had watched the captain come out, heard the mockery, and frowned. But before Sterling could intervene, a sharp pain shot down his left arm, shattering his reality. The real drama was about to begin. Up in seat 2A, the world had narrowed down to a pinpoint of agonizing pressure in the center of Alistair Sterling's chest. It felt less like pain and more like a grown elephant had decided to sit on his sternum. He tried to shift in the wide leather seat, gasping for air that didn't seem to reach his lungs. Sterling was a man used to control. As the executive VP of operations for Meridian Airways, he controlled routes, he controlled budgets, and he controlled the fates of thousands of employees, including Captain Richard Miller. But he couldn't control this. His left arm was numb, a dead weight hanging at his side, and a cold, clammy sweat broke out instantly across his forehead, soaking the collar of his expensive Italian shirt. "It's just indigestion," he told himself desperately. That airport club sandwich was greasy. He tried to reach for the call button, but his hand was shaking so violently he missed it twice. When he finally depressed it, the ding sounded miles away. Chloe, the junior flight attendant assigned to first class, was in the galley preparing pre-departure beverages that she hoped would still be cold. She was 23, new to the job, and terrified of making a mistake, especially with a VIP on board. When she saw the light for 2A, she smoothed her skirt, put on her best service smile, and stepped into the aisle. "Mr. Sterling, how can I?" Her words died in her throat. Sterling wasn't just uncomfortable, he was gray. His skin had taken on the color of wet ash, and his eyes were wide and unfocused, staring blankly at the ceiling. His breath was coming in shallow, ragged gasps, like a fish out of water. "Sir?" Chloe rushed forward, kneeling in the aisle beside him. "Mr. Sterling, are you all right? Can you hear me?" Sterling tried to speak, but only a guttural groan escaped his lips. His hand clawed feebly at his tie, trying to loosen a knot that felt like a noose. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Chloe's training. She grabbed his wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but it was erratic, thready, and terrifyingly fast. "Oh my God," she whispered. She stood up, looking frantically toward the cockpit door, then back at the man gasping for his life. She needed help. Now, she bolted for the cockpit. She punched in the code and threw the door open, startling Captain Miller and his first officer, Dave Simmons, who were busily complaining about the ground crew over their headsets. Captain Miller!" Chloe was breathless, her voice squeaking with terror. Miller spun around in his seat, annoyed at the intrusion. "Chloe, what is it?" "We're busy trying to get a pushback time." "It's Mr. Sterling in 2A, she choked out. I think he's dying. He can't breathe, he's gray, and his pulse is going crazy. I think it's a heart attack." The color drained from Miller's face faster than water from a tub. The arrogance, the swagger, the smug assurance that he was the king of this metal domain, it all evaporated instantly. Alistair Sterling wasn't just a passenger. He was the man who signed the paychecks. If Sterling died on Miller's plane, especially after a 3-hour delay Miller had mismanaged, his career was over. "Are you sure?" Miller stammered, unbuckling his harness with fumbling fingers. "He looks terrible, Captain." "Worse than terrible." Miller turned to his first officer. "Dave, tell the tower we have a critical medical emergency. We need paramedics at the gate now. Forget the water truck. We need an ambulance." He stood up, grabbing the medical kit from the bulkhead. "Chloe, get the oxygen bottle. Meet me at his seat." Miller stepped out of the cockpit and into the first-class cabin. When he saw Sterling slumped over, his head lolling against the window, reality hit him hard. This wasn't a drill. This was a man dying on his watch. He rushed over, his heart hammering against his ribs nearly as hard as Sterling's was. He checked for a response. Nothing. Just those awful, ragged gasps. "Mr. Sterling? Alistair? Can you hear me?" Miller shook his shoulder gently. No response. Miller looked up as Chloe arrived with the portable oxygen tank. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely fit the mask over Sterling's nose and mouth. "Turn it on." "High flow," Miller barked, his voice tight with fear. Chloe twisted the valve. Oxygen hissed into the mask. They watched, waited, prayed for the color to return to his face, for his breathing to ease. A minute passed. It felt like an hour. Sterling's condition wasn't improving. If anything, the gasps were becoming less frequent, quieter. The gray pallor was deepening into a terrifying blue around his lips. Miller looked at Chloe, his eyes wide with a terror he hadn't felt since his first solo flight in a thunderstorm 30 years ago. The pilot, the man who had just lectured a passenger about authority, realized he had absolutely none here. He was out of his depth. He was helpless. "He's not responding to the O2, Miller whispered, his voice cracking. We need a doctor. Now." The atmosphere in the economy cabin had settled into a miserable stupor. The heat was unrelenting, and most passengers had given up complaining, resigning themselves to their sweaty fate. Jenny was back in the rear galley, bitching to her junior colleague about the entitled jerk in 14C while scrolling through her phone. Then, the cabin interphone chimed 3 times the signal for an emergency call from the flight deck. Jenny snatched up the handset. "Galley," Jenny speaking. "Jenny, it's Captain Miller." His voice was unrecognizable, tight, strained, bordering on panic. "We have a critical medical emergency in first class. Passenger in 2A is unresponsive, possible cardiac arrest. We need a doctor. Immediately." Jenny felt her stomach drop. A doctor, Captain?" "Yes, damn it, a doctor. Make the announcement. Now. And bring the AED, automated external defibrillator, to the front. Move." The line went dead. Jenny stared at the handset for a second, her mind reeling. The transition from mundane annoyance to life-or-death crisis was too fast to process. But training kicked in. She grabbed the interphone microphone. Ding. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Her voice wavered slightly over the speakers. The cabin fell silent. The tone of her voice was different than the usual delay announcements. It was sharp with fear. "We have a medical emergency on board. If there is a licensed physician, nurse, or paramedic on the aircraft, please ring your call button immediately. We need your assistance in the front cabin." Silence fell over the plane, heavier and hotter than the air. Everyone looked around, scanning their neighbors, hoping someone would raise their hand. 5 seconds passed. 10. No call buttons chimed. Up front, Miller was sweating profoundly, his eyes fixed on the limp form of his boss. "Where are they? Why isn't anyone calling?" he hissed at Chloe. "Maybe they didn't hear," Chloe whispered. Terrified, Miller grabbed the PA mic from the forward bulkhead. He didn't bother with the professional preamble. "Folks, this is the captain." His voice boomed, cracking with desperation. "This is a critical emergency. A man's life is at stake here. If you have any medical training, doctor, EMT, combat medic, anything, we need you up here right now. Please." In seat 14C, Raymond Hayes unbuckled his seatbelt. He had heard the first announcement and hesitated. He was exhausted, his reflexes dulled by lack of sleep. He had hoped someone else, a younger, fresher resident, maybe would step up. But the desperation in the captain's voice on the second call left no room for hesitation. This was real. Greg, the businessman next to him, saw Raymond move. "Whoa, dude, where are you going?" Greg whispered furiously. "You heard that witch, Jenny. She said stay in your seat. You go up there, they're gonna have you arrested for interfering. That captain already hates you." Raymond looked at Greg. The fatigue was still in his eyes, but something else had overtaken it, a steely, professional resolve. "Someone is dying, Greg." Raymond stood up. He stepped into the aisle. At that moment, Jenny was rushing up the aisle from the back, carrying the red AED case. She saw Raymond standing, and her eyes narrowed instinctively. The stress of the situation channeled back into her previous irritation. "Sir, what did I tell you?" she snapped, breathless from running. "Sit down. We have a medical emergency. This is not the time for your games. Get out of my way." She tried to push past him. Raymond didn't budge. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He just placed a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her momentum. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze intense and completely clear. "I am a doctor," he said. His voice was low, but it had the undeniable weight of authority. "Give me the AED and take me to the patient." Jenny stopped cold. She blinked, her brain trying to reconcile the man in the cheap hoodie she had mocked with the commanding presence standing before her. You're a doctor?" she stammered. "Yes? Now move. Every second counts." He didn't wait for her permission. He gently but firmly took the AED from her paralyzed hands and started walking briskly toward the front curtain. Jenny, stunned and confused, trailed behind him like a scolded child. Raymond burst through the curtain into first class. The scene was chaotic. The captain and Chloe were hovering uselessly over a man whose color was grotesque. The smell of fear was palpable. Captain Miller looked up, relief washing over his face when he saw movement, immediately followed by confusion and surging anger when he recognized the face. "You?" Miller spluttered, standing up from kneeling beside Sterling. "What are you doing up here? I told you to stay put. This is a life and death situation, not a joke, you idiot. Get back to economy before I—" "Captain Miller, shut up and step aside," Raymond said. He didn't shout, but the command whipped through the small cabin like a lash. Miller froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that on his own plane. Raymond dropped to his knees beside Alistair Sterling, ignoring the pilot completely. He pulled the oxygen mask back slightly to check the airway. He placed 2 fingers against Sterling's carotid artery, his eyes focused on the second hand of his watch. No palpable pulse. Agonal breathing, Raymond announced clearly, his mind shifting into trauma bay mode. He looked up at Miller, who was still gaping at him. Help me get him out of this seat and onto the floor. The aisle. Now, we need a hard surface for compressions. Miller hesitated, his ego warring with his panic. Move, Captain, Raymond roared. It was the voice that commanded operating rooms when a patient was bleeding out. Miller jumped. He grabbed Sterling's shoulders while Raymond took his legs. They awkwardly wrestled the heavy, unconscious man out of the seat and laid him flat on the thin galley carpet. Raymond immediately ripped open Sterling's expensive shirt, sending buttons flying. He placed the heel of one hand on the center of the bare chest, interlaced the fingers of his other hand on top, locked his elbows, and began hard, fast chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Jenny. Raymond barked between compressions. Not looking up. Open the AED. Attach the pads. Top right chest, lower left ribs. Do you know how to do it? Jenny, standing in the curtained doorway, nodded mutely, terrified. She scrambled forward, opening the red case with shaking hands. Chloe, Raymond continued, his voice a metronome, keeping time with his compressions. I need my carry-on bag from 14C. It's a black leather backpack underneath the seat in front of me. Run. Get it. Chloe sprinted away. Miller stood over them, watching the man he had labeled a nobody fight to save the life of the most powerful man in the airline. He felt sick. Is he going to make it? Miller whispered. Raymond didn't answer. He was counting. 25, 26, 27. Jenny managed to stick the pads onto Sterling's chest. The machine whirred to life, its automated voice filling the silent cabin. Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient. Raymond threw his hands up, hovering over the chest. Everyone held their breath. Shock advised. Charging. A high-pitched whine began to build. Clear, Raymond yelled, scanning head to toe to make sure no one was touching Sterling. He pressed the flashing orange button. Sterling's body jolted violently on the floor as electricity coursed through his stopped heart. Raymond immediately went back to compressions. 1, 2, 3. What is it? Miller asked, his voice trembling. Ventricular fibrillation, Raymond said calmly, not breaking his rhythm. His heart is quivering instead of beating. We need to shock it back into rhythm. Chloe returned, breathless, sliding Raymond's leather backpack across the floor. Captain, Raymond said, his breath starting to come in short bursts from the physical exertion of CPR. Open the front pocket of that bag. There's a leather wallet. Open it. Miller, eager to do something useful, knelt down and unzipped the bag. He pulled out a slim, black leather wallet. He flipped it open. Inside was a photo ID. But it wasn't a driver's license. It was a hospital ID card from Massachusetts General Hospital. It featured the face of the man currently pumping on Sterling's chest, but clean-shaven and in a white coat. Next to the photo, in bold letters, it read, Dr. Raymond Hayes, Chief of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery. Miller stared at the ID. He looked at the man in the faded hoodie. He looked back at the ID. The blood drained from his face so completely he looked ready to pass out himself. Oh my God, Miller whispered. He looked up at Jenny, who was staring at the ID over his shoulder, her hand clamped over her mouth in horror. They hadn't just mocked a doctor. They had mocked one of the country's leading heart surgeons, while their boss was dying of a heart attack a few feet away. The weight of their mistake crashed down on them with the force of a falling engine. Focus, people, doctor. Hayes snapped, sensing their shock. Captain, inside that bag is a small black pouch. It's my personal emergency kit. I need an IV start kit and a pre-filled syringe of epinephrine. Find them. The AED analyzed again. Shock advised. As Raymond prepared to deliver the second shock, Captain Miller, the man who hated being told what to do, scrambled through the bag like a terrified intern, desperate to obey the orders of the man in the gray hoodie. The first-class cabin, usually a sanctuary of champagne and hot towels, had become a trauma bay. The air smelled of ozone from the AED and the metallic tang of fear. "Epinephrine, Captain, now," Raymond commanded, his hand extended without looking up. Captain Miller, trembling like a leaf in a gale, fumbled the pre-filled syringe from the kit Raymond had directed him to. He slapped it into the surgeon's palm. Raymond didn't hesitate. He found the vein in the antecubital fossa of Sterling's arm, a difficult stick on a collapsed patient, and threaded the needle with the precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He pushed the plunger. "Resume compressions," Raymond ordered. He didn't wait for Miller or Jenny. He leaned back over, his triceps burning, sweat dripping from his nose onto the expensive carpet. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, Alistair," Miller whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "Don't do this." Jenny was sobbing silently in the galley corner, clutching the empty water bottle she had denied Raymond earlier. She watched the nobody from seat 14C work. She saw the focus, the economy of movement, the sheer competence radiating off him. Every compression was a rebuke to her arrogance. Every clear, calm order was a mirror showing her own ugliness. "Check pulse," Raymond called out after 2 minutes. He stopped. Silence rushed back into the cabin, louder than the engines. Everyone stared at the rise and fall of Sterling's chest. Raymond pressed his fingers to the carotid. He waited. He frowned. Then, his eyes widened slightly. "I have a pulse," he said softly. "Weak, thready, but it's there. Sinus rhythm returning." Miller let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "He's alive?" "He's stable for now," Raymond said, sitting back on his heels and wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "But he's not out of the woods. His heart has taken a massive hit. We need to get him to a cath lab immediately. Where are the paramedics?" As if on cue, a heavy pounding came from the main cabin door. The jet bridge had finally reconnected. The door swung open, and 3 paramedics rushed in, carrying a stretcher and heavy gear. The lead paramedic, a burly man named Kowalski, scanned the scene. He saw the unconscious VIP on the floor, the terrified flight crew, and the man in the gray hoodie kneeling beside the patient. Kowalski's eyes locked onto the man in the hoodie. He froze for a split second. "Dr. Hayes?" Kowalski asked, stunned. "Dr. Raymond Hayes from Mass Gen?" Raymond looked up, recognizing the paramedic from a transfer a few months back. "Kowalski, good to see you. We have a male, approx 60, witnessed cardiac arrest. VFib. 1 shock delivered. 1 milligram epi administered. ROSC achieved 2 minutes ago." Kowalski nodded respectfully, his demeanor shifting instantly to one of deference. "Copy that, Doc. We'll take it from here." "Boys, you heard the doctor? Let's move." As the paramedics swarmed in, lifting Sterling onto the backboard with practiced ease, Captain Miller stood against the cockpit door, shrinking into the background. He watched the paramedics treat the man in the hoodie like a general on a battlefield. "Doc," Kowalski said as they strapped Sterling in, "we're taking him to Northwestern. You want to ride with us?" Raymond shook his head, standing up and stretching his aching back. "I need to get to Boston. My wife is waiting. Just tell the receiving team it looks like an LAD occlusion. They'll know what to do." "Will do. Great work, Doc. You saved him." As the paramedics wheeled Sterling out, the cabin fell silent again. It was just Raymond, Miller, Jenny, and Chloe left in the wreckage of the first-class galley. Raymond picked up his backpack. He zipped it calmly. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He turned to go back to his seat in economy. "Doctor." "Dr. Hayes." Miller's voice was a croak. He took a step forward, his hands held up in a pleading gesture. I had no idea. I am so." Raymond stopped. He turned slowly to face the captain. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He just looked at Miller with a gaze that was colder than the high-altitude air. "You had no idea I was a surgeon," Raymond said quietly. "That's true. But you knew I was a human being. And that should have been enough." Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth of the statement hit him like a physical blow. "I don't want your apology, Captain," Raymond continued, hoisting his bag onto his shoulder. "I want you to fly this plane safely to Boston. Do your job. I've done mine." He turned and walked back through the curtain. As he emerged into the economy cabin, a hush fell over the passengers. They had seen the paramedics. They had heard the commotion. They watched the man in the gray hoodie walk down the aisle. Greg, the guy in 14B, looked at Raymond with wide eyes. "Dude, is he?" "He'll live," Raymond said simply, sliding back into his seat and pulling his medical journal back out. Greg shook his head in disbelief. You're a legend, man. A total legend. Jenny, still standing in the front galley, watched him sit down. She felt a wave of shame so intense it made her nauseous. She realized then that the uniform didn't make her important, and the hoodie didn't make him nothing. She had just learned the most expensive lesson of her life. The flight to Boston was somber. The air conditioning had finally kicked in, but the chill in the cabin wasn't just from the vents. The flight attendants, usually chatty, moved like ghosts, avoiding eye contact with row 14. Jenny spent the entire flight in the rear galley, hiding. She couldn't bear to walk past Raymond. Every time she thought about her snapping her fingers at him, mocking his request for water, she felt sick. Captain Miller was in his own private hell in the cockpit. He flew mechanically, his mind replaying the scene over and over. He knew who Alistair Sterling was. He knew Sterling was a man who paid attention to details. If Sterling survived, he would remember. And if he didn't remember, there were witnesses. As they began their descent into Boston Logan, Miller knew he had to do something. He had to try and salvage the situation. He turned on the seatbelt sign and keyed the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. His voice was devoid of its usual swagger. It sounded hollow, defeated. We are beginning our descent into Boston. I want to take a moment to address the delay and the medical emergency we experienced in Chicago. The cabin went quiet. We had a serious incident today. A passenger's life was in grave danger, and the only reason that passenger is alive right now is because of the heroic actions of one of our customers. Miller paused. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out. I want to personally thank Dr. Raymond Hayes in seat 14C. Dr. Hayes is the chief of thoracic surgery at Mass General. He stepped up when we were unprepared. He saved a life today. Doctor, on behalf of the crew and Meridian Airways, thank you. And I apologize for the earlier confusion. The confusion. It was a weak euphemism, and everyone knew it. But the passengers didn't care about the semantics. A ripple started in row 1, applause that grew louder as it traveled back. By the time it reached row 14, the whole plane was clapping. People were turning around, craning their necks to see the hero. Greg slapped Raymond on the back. That's you, Doc. Take a bow. Raymond didn't stand up. He didn't wave. He just offered a tight, polite smile and stared out the window at the clouds. He wasn't interested in adulation. He was interested in justice. And he knew that the real reckoning hadn't happened yet. When the plane landed, the passengers deplaned. As Raymond walked toward the exit, Jenny was standing by the door, compelled by protocol to say goodbye. Her face was blotchy from crying, her makeup ruined. Dr. Hayes, she whispered, looking at her shoes. I am so sorry. Raymond paused. He looked at her name tag. Jenny, you're in a profession of care, strictly speaking, safety and care. Today, you failed at both. Not because of a lack of training, but because of a lack of empathy. I hope you find it. He walked off the jet bridge, leaving her weeping openly in front of the boarding passengers. The silence in the waiting room of Meridian Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas was not peaceful. It was predatory. It was the kind of silence that eats away at your composure, second by second. 2 weeks had passed since Flight 812 landed in Boston. 2 weeks of administrative leave. 2 weeks of silence from the company. Captain Richard Miller sat in a sleek, uncomfortable leather chair, staring at a piece of abstract art on the wall that looked like a plane crash. He shifted his weight, the leather creaking loudly in the quiet room. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He had been instructed, specifically, to appear in business formal attire. For a man who had worn the navy blue and gold bars for 30 years, the gray suit felt like a costume. It felt like a shroud. Across from him, Jenny sat on the edge of a sofa, clutching a purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked diminished. The layers of makeup and attitude she usually wore like armor were gone. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, fraying ponytail. She hadn't looked at Miller once since they arrived. They were accomplices in a crime they hadn't realized they were committing until the handcuffs of reality were already locked. The heavy oak doors opened. An assistant, young and terrified-looking, stepped out. Captain Miller? Jenny, Mr. Sterling is ready for you now. They stood up. Miller's legs felt heavy, like he was walking through wet concrete. He checked his watch, a habit from decades of flight schedules, but time didn't matter anymore. They entered the boardroom. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sweltering Texas skyline. The air conditioning was set to a chilling 68 degrees. A stark, ironic contrast to the sauna they had created on the tarmac in Chicago. At the head of the table sat Alistair Sterling. He looked different than the gray, dying man on the galley floor. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his color returned, though a small, visible lump under his shirt collar hinted at the pacemaker that now regulated his heartbeat. But Sterling wasn't alone. To his right sat Elias Thorne, the chief pilot of Meridian Airways. A man Miller had known for 20 years, a drinking buddy, a golf partner. Thorne didn't look up. He was studying a file folder with an intensity that suggested he wanted to be anywhere but here. To Sterling's left sat Sarah Jenkins, the grim-faced director of human resources, and a man Miller didn't recognize. A lawyer, presumably, with a yellow legal pad and a pen that cost more than Jenny's car. "Sit," Sterling said. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Miller and Jenny took the 2 chairs placed in the center of the room. Isolated, like the accused in a tribunal. "I want to begin by establishing the ground rules of this meeting," Sterling said, his voice calm, level, and utterly devoid of warmth. "This is a formal disciplinary hearing regarding the events of Flight 812. Everything said here is being recorded." He pointed to a small digital recorder in the center of the table. "We have spent the last 14 days conducting a forensic audit of the flight," Sterling continued. "We have interviewed the first officer, the junior flight attendant Chloe, the gate agents, and 34 passengers who submitted formal complaints. We have also had extensive conversations with Dr. Raymond Hayes." Miller cleared his throat. "Alistair, Mr. Sterling, look, I know how this looks. I want to start by saying, you will speak when you are questioned, Captain," the lawyer cut in, his voice sharp. "Not before." Sterling opened a laptop connected to the room's speaker system. "Before we discuss consequences, we need to agree on the facts. And the most unbiased witness we have is the aircraft itself." Sterling clicked a mouse. "This is the audio from the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, time-stamped 14:15 Central Standard Time. 3 hours into the delay." Static hissed through the high-end speakers, followed by the unmistakable sound of Captain Miller's voice. "Unbelievable. Ground control says another 40 minutes. Can you believe the union reps?" Then Jenny's voice, clear and sharp. "Tell me about it. And the packs back here are getting rowdy. I've got a guy in 14C who thinks he runs the airline, trying to tell me how to do my job, demanding water like I'm his personal servant." In the boardroom, Jenny flinched as if she'd been slapped. Hearing her own voice petulant, nasty, dismissive, echoing off the glass walls was agonizing. The recording continued. Miller's voice again, booming with that confident, arrogant swagger. 14C? The guy in the hoodie? He looks like he's used to waiting at bus stops, not flying. Probably his first time on a plane. Miller closed his eyes. He remembered saying it. He remembered the feeling of superiority, the cheap laugh he had tried to solicit from the flight attendant. In the cold light of the boardroom, it sounded hateful. It sounded racist. The tape played on, the mocking, the threats. The moment Miller told Raymond, "If you have a problem with authority, you can get off." Sterling paused the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Used to waiting at bus stops, Sterling repeated the phrase slowly, tasting the bile in it. He looked at Miller. "Richard, do you know who Raymond Hayes is?" "I know now," Miller whispered, his gaze fixed on the mahogany table. "He's a surgeon." "He isn't just a surgeon," Sterling corrected, sliding a dossier across the table. "Dr. Raymond Hayes is the son of a sharecropper from Alabama. He put himself through Yale Medical School on academic scholarships. He has pioneered 3 distinct procedures for aortic valve replacement. He travels to developing nations 4 times a year to perform free heart surgeries on children." Sterling leaned forward, his eyes boring into Miller's. "He is a man of infinite consequence. And you reduced him to a stereotype because he wasn't wearing a suit." Miller tried to rally. He tried to find the defense mechanism that had served him for decades. "Sir, with respect, I didn't know that. We are trained to profile for security. A passenger behaving erratically, refusing commands. I was protecting the flight deck." "Protecting the flight deck?" Chief Pilot Thorne finally spoke, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Richard, I reviewed the cabin logs. He asked for water. Water. For an 80-year-old woman with a history of hypertension, that is not erratic behavior. That is a distress call. Thorne opened the file in front of him. And let's talk about the security profile. You threatened to arrest the only person on that aircraft capable of saving our boss's life. If Dr. Hayes had listened to you, if he had been as cowed by authority as you wanted him to be, Alistair would be dead. We would be planning a funeral today, not a disciplinary hearing. Sterling took a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly, a reminder of the trauma his body had endured. I spoke with Dr. Hayes yesterday, Sterling said softly. I asked him what he wanted. I asked him if he wanted a settlement, if he wanted a public apology, if he wanted your jobs. Jenny looked up, hope and terror warring in her eyes. What? What did he say? He said he didn't want your money, Sterling said. And he said he didn't want your apology, because he didn't believe it would be sincere. He said an apology born from fear of punishment is just another form of manipulation. Sterling stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the planes taking off from DFW Airport in the distance. He told me a story, Jenny. He told me that when he was a resident, he made a mistake. He was tired, he was arrogant, and he dismissed a nurse's concern. A patient suffered because of it. His attending physician didn't fire him. He made him work as a nurse's aide for a month. He made him empty bedpans and change sheets until he remembered that the letters M.D. after his name stood for medical doctor, not major deity. Sterling turned back to face them. The moment of judgment had arrived. But we are not a teaching hospital, Sterling said, his voice hardening. We are an airline, and the liability you two have exposed us to is catastrophic. If the press gets hold of that audio, and in the age of smartphones, we have to assume someone recorded the cabin interaction. Meridian Airways becomes the face of discrimination and incompetence. He looked at the HR director. Sarah read the determination. Sarah Jenkins adjusted her glasses and looked at the paper regarding Captain Richard Miller. You are found to be in violation of Article 4, Section 2 of the Pilot's Code of Conduct. Gross professional misconduct. You also violated the fit-to-fly protocol by escalating a non-threat situation. She looked up. The board has recommended immediate termination. Miller gasped. Termination? Sarah, I have 30 years. My pension. I'm 2 years out. You can't strip my pension. We can, the lawyer interjected smoothly. Under the moral turpitude clause of your contract, gross negligence resulting in endangerment of life allows us to void the golden parachute. Miller looked at Thorne, begging. Elias, please. You know me. One bad day. It wasn't one bad day, Rick, Thorne said sadly. We pulled your file. 3 complaints in the last year about attitude and condescension. We ignored them because you were a senior captain. We enabled this. But we can't ignore this. Miller slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked like an old man. However, Sterling interrupted, I am not going to terminate you. Miller's head snapped up. Dr. Hayes asked me not to, Sterling said. He said that destroying an old man's life doesn't save a patient. It just leaves another body on the field. Sterling walked back to the table. So, here is the deal, Richard. You will not be fired. You will be allowed to retire. Today. Miller let out a breath. Thank you. Thank you, Alistair. Do not thank me yet, Sterling cut him off. You will retire with a standard benefits package, not the executive tier. That means your monthly payout is cut by 60%. You lose the flight privileges, you lose the consulting retainer. And you will sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that you left for personal health reasons. If you ever speak about Dr. Hayes or this incident, we will release the audio recording to the FAA and CNN, and we will sue you for the breach. 60%. It was financial ruin. It meant selling the lake house. It meant the boat was gone. It meant a retirement of budgeting, not luxury. But it was better than nothing. I accept, Miller whispered. Good. Sign the papers, Sterling said, sliding a stack of documents toward him. Then leave your badge and your wings on the table. You are no longer a captain. As Miller shakily signed away his career, Sterling turned his eyes to Jenny. She was trembling visibly now. She knew she didn't have a penchant to leverage. She was disposable. "Jenny," Sterling said, "your file is thinner, but the contents are just as rotting. You are the face of the airline. You are the first interaction. And you treated a calm, polite passenger like a criminal because you were hot and tired." "I was stressed," Jenny sobbed. "We were on the tarmac for 3 hours. The systems were down. I just snapped." "I'm sorry." "You snapped at the wrong person," Sterling said. "But more importantly, when the emergency happened, you froze. You hesitated to give the AED to the doctor because of your personal animosity. That delay, that 10-second hesitation, that could have been the difference between my brain getting oxygen and me being a vegetable." Jenny put her head in her hands. "You are terminated from flight status effective immediately," Sarah Jenkins stated. "Your badge is deactivated." Jenny began to cry louder. "Please, Mr. Sterling. I have rent. I have student loans. I can't lose this job. I don't know how to do anything else." Sterling watched her for a moment. He saw the genuine fear. It wasn't the fake tears of a caught child. It was the terrifying realization of adulthood hitting hard. "Again," Sterling said. Dr. Hayes intervened. Jenny looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "He did? He suggested that firing you would only make you bitter. He suggested that you needed perspective." Sterling picked up a remote control and clicked a button. A map of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport appeared on the screen, zooming in on the lower levels of Terminal B. "We have an opening," Sterling said. "It is not in the sky, it is in the basement, the lost luggage and claims department." Jenny's eyes widened in horror. The dungeon, as the crews called it, it was a windowless room where angry passengers came to scream about lost golf clubs and broken strollers. It was the lowest rung of the airline ladder. "It is a union position," Sterling said. "Minimum wage start, no flight benefits for the first 2 years. You will deal with the angriest, most frustrated people in the world. People who have been delayed, people who have been inconvenienced, people who want water and answers." Sterling leaned in close. "You will stand behind that counter, Jenny, and you will learn to listen. You will learn to apologize. You will learn that every person screaming at you is just a human being having a bad day. You will learn the empathy you failed to show Dr. Hayes." I can't do that," she whispered. "It's humiliating." "Then you can leave," Sterling said coldly. "Those are your options. The dungeon or the street. Choose." Jenny looked at Miller, who was staring blankly at his signed retirement papers. She looked at the lawyer. She realized she had zero leverage. "I'll take it," she whispered. "Good," Sterling said. "Shift starts Monday at 0500. Don't be late." Sterling buttoned his jacket and stood up. The meeting was over. But he had one last twist of the knife, one last piece of karma to deliver. "Oh, and Captain Miller?" Miller looked up, his eyes hollow. "Yes?" "You asked about the technical glitch that caused the delay," Sterling said. "The reason the APU failed and the cabin got so hot?" "Yes," Miller said. "It wasn't a mechanical failure," Sterling said, a dark irony in his voice. "Maintenance found a bird's nest in the intake. A simple sparrow's nest. Nature just got in the way." Sterling paused at the door. "It's funny," he mused. "Dr. Hayes mentioned something about that. He said, nature has a way of grounding us when we think we're flying too high. I suggest you both think about that." Sterling walked out, followed by Thorne and the lawyer. The heavy door clicked shut. Miller and Jenny were left alone in the cold, silent boardroom. On the table sat a pair of gold pilot wings, stripped from a uniform, glinting under the fluorescent lights. They looked like a relic from a civilization that had collapsed. Miller reached out and touched the wings one last time. He didn't pick them up. He left them there, a monument to his ego. "Come on," Miller said, his voice cracking. "Let's go." They walked to the elevator in silence. The ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into the underworld. When the doors opened, the heat of the Dallas afternoon hit them, a physical reminder of the heat in the cabin that had started it all. Jenny walked toward the bus stop to begin her life in the basement. Miller walked toward the parking garage, an old man in a gray suit, just another face in the crowd, waiting for his car, waiting for nothing. The karma hadn't been a lightning bolt, it had been a mirror. And for the rest of their lives, every time they looked into one, they would see the face of the person who almost killed a man with their pride. Dr. Raymond Hayes was already back in Boston, scrubbing in for a mitral valve repair. He didn't know the details of the meeting, and he didn't care. He had already moved on. That was the ultimate victory. He was saving lives. They were just living with the consequences of theirs. This story serves as a brutal reminder that you never truly know who you are talking to. Captain Miller and Jenny judged a book by its cover, a faded hoodie, and a quiet demeanor, and paid the ultimate price for their arrogance. True power doesn't need to shout, and true authority doesn't need a uniform. Dr. Hayes showed us that dignity is an internal trait, one that shines brightest when others try to dim it. In a world where everyone wants to be the main character, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds the power of life and death in their hands. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder to be kind, and subscribe for more stories where karma always collects its debt. Thanks for watching, and stay humble.